Let's starts now. The Final Sunrise. Act 1. The Blood of the Sacrifice. Scene 1. The God of Flesh awakes body horror. The Infinity Castle didn't just shake, it screamed. As the meat cocoon shattered, Muzan Kibutsuji didn't just step out, he erupted. His skin, once as smooth as porcelain, was now a map of pulsating, purple veins. But the horror was in the details. Across his torso, thighs, and arms, 12 giant, jagged mouths ripped open. They weren't just for show. They were breathing in unison, a rhythmic, wet sound that echoed through the hall. Each mouth acted as a high-pressure intake valve, sucking in the oxygen from the room to fuel his hyper-regeneration. The air around Muzan became a vacuum, making it almost impossible for the Hashira to perform their breathing styles. His hair, now a ghostly, bone white, whipped around his face like a nest of albino cobras. This was no longer a man. This was a biological disaster. Scene 2. The final needle, Tamayo's victory. Tamayo's hand was still buried in his chest, her fingers clutching his primary heart. Muzan's claws dug into her skull, blood pouring down her beautiful, vengeful face. Why? Muzan's voice was a distorted, multi-tonal roar. Why do you persist, you wretched traitor? I gave you eternity. Tamayo smiled, and for the first time in 400 years, there was no sadness in her eyes, only a cold, piercing triumph. Muzan, do you feel it? The cells in your heart? They are turning into lead. You didn't just swallow my blood. You swallowed my hatred. I have aged you by 9,000 years in a single minute. Your eternity has just become a ticking clock. Look at your hands, Muzan. They are trembling. For the first time in a millennium, you're afraid of the dark. With a sickening crunch, Muzan crushed her head. But as her body began to dissolve into ash, her laughter lingered in the air, a ghost that would haunt him until the sun rose. Scene 3. The Mind Thief's Gambit Yushiro versus Nakaim. High above the battlefield, on a floating wooden platform, the Baiwa woman, Nakaim, was in a seizure-like trance. Her single, giant eye was wide, blood vessels popping like tiny firecrackers. Standing behind her was Yushiro. His hands were pressed against her temples, his own eyes glowing with a frenzied, demonic blue light. He was diving into her neural network, fighting Muzan's own mental commands. Move, you puppet! Yushiro's thoughts were a jagged blade. This castle belongs to me now. I will tear this fortress out of the earth and drag your master into the light of the sun. We see a visual representation of their minds. A web of glowing red Muzan and blue Yushiro lines clashing. Yushiro's nose began to bleed and his skin started to tear from the sheer mental pressure, but he didn't let go. With a final agonizing scream, he struck the Baiwa strings himself. Pluck. The entire castle began to tilt at a 90-degree angle. Scene 4. The surface breach. The world above was a quiet, moonlit town. Suddenly, the earth heaved. Buildings were swallowed by the rising wood and stone of the Infinity Castle. Boom! The fortress erupted through the surface, shattering the street like glass. Dust, debris, and ancient mahogany beams filled the night air. The slayers were thrown out onto the debris-strewn streets. The battle was no longer in a closed labyrinth. It was under the open sky. The moon was high, but the eastern horizon held the faintest, most lethal hint of gray. The countdown to dawn had begun. Scene 5. The Wall of Hashira, the synced attack. Muzan stood in the center of the town square, his flesh whips extending 60 feet in every direction. They moved so fast, they created sonic booms, turning every nearby building into dust. Now! Yomi Haimijima's voice was a thunderous command. The five Hashira moved in a perfect, lethal formation. Gi water, flowing like a river, parrying the whips with 11th form, dead calm. Obanai serpent, slithering through the gaps, his blade a flickering tongue. Mitsuri love, her whip sword creating a chaotic perimeter of slashes. Tsunemi wind, a jagged cyclone of rage, his green blade leaving trails of ozone. Gyome stone, the heavy hitter, his flail smashing through Muzan's defensive tentacles. The sparks of steel against demon flesh lit up the night. Muzan was being pushed back, but he was laughing. His 12 mouths began to chant in a low, guttural language. The real massacre was just about to start. Tanjiro Kamado stood at the edge of the crater, his hand on his chest. His heart was beating in a strange, erratic rhythm. The Hinokami Kagura was burning through his veins, but something else was waking up. He looked at Muzan and saw not a demon, but a collection of vulnerable spots. The 13th form was calling to him. Muzan! Tanjiro roared, his voice cutting through the sounds of battle. This street will be your grave. Act 2. The Night of the Dying Stars. Scene 1. The Sonic Scream nervous system horror. The battle in the town square had reached a fever pitch, but suddenly, Muzan Kibutsuji's 12 mouths stopped inhaling. They opened wide, his jaw unhinging like a serpent's. Muzan let out a high-frequency sonic scream. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical wall of vibration. The windows of the surrounding buildings shattered into dust. The Hashira were hit by a wave of nausea. Their eardrums ruptured, blood trickling down their necks. But worse, the frequency targeted their nervous systems. Their muscles began to spasm uncontrollably, their breathing rhythms breaking. Gi fell to one knee, his sword shaking. Tsunemi vomited blood, his balance gone. Muzan stood in the center, a dark god of silence, watching the mighty slayers turn into twitching corpses. Scene 2. The Serpent's Forbidden Blood deep flashback. As Obanai Iguro struggled to regain control of his body, his mind drifted back to the dark cell. Flashback. We see the snake demon, a massive, scaly horror with a woman's face, licking the blood from Obanai's slit mouth. His family didn't love him. They worshipped him as food for the demon. He grew up believing his very blood was tainted by the greed and sin of his ancestors. Every time he looked at Mitsuri Kinroji, her bright, cheerful soul, he felt like a shadow that would only stain her. He wore the bandages not just to hide his scars, but to hide the monster he thought he was. He didn't want to survive this night. He wanted to die as a hero so that his soul could be reborn as someone worthy of her. Scene 3. The love shield Obanai's silent rage. Muzan's whip lashed out, aimed directly at Mitsuri's throat. She was too exhausted to move. But in a split second, a blur of white and black stripes intervened. Obanai didn't just block. He moved with God speed, born of pure, desperate love. His blade, the serpent breathing, moved like a liquid flicker, parrying 6 tentacles at once. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, one turquoise, one yellow, were burning with a rage that surpassed Muzan's. He pushed Mitsuri behind a stone wall, his body a living shield. Even as a tentacle tore through his shoulder, he didn't flinch. He was no longer fighting for the core. He was fighting for the only light he had ever known. Scene 4. The anatomy of a god-transparent world. Tanjiro Kamado, clutching his chest, forced his brain into a state of absolute calm. The world slowed down. The colors faded. Tanjiro entered the transparent world, see-through world. For the first time, he saw the internal mechanics of the Demon King. Muzan didn't have one heart, he had 7. They were constantly moving, shifting positions within his chest and abdomen to avoid lethal strikes. And he had 5 brains distributed across his head and torso, processing the battle at a speed no human could match. Tanjiro realized that decapitation was useless. To kill Muzan, all 12 organs had to be destroyed simultaneously. He saw the way the blood flowed, the way the muscles twitched before a whip strike. He saw the opening thread, but it was a tangled mess of red death. Scene 5, the shattering of the stone, the final stand. Gyomai Haimijima, sensing the team was about to be annihilated, unleashed his final reserve. Stone breathing, 4th form, volcanic rock, rapid conquest. He swung his massive flail, smashing through the town's asphalt, creating a barrier of rock to protect the fallen slayers. But Muzan was done playing. He unleashed a thorn burst. Thousands of needle-like flesh spikes erupted from his body. Gyomei, protecting Tsunemi and Giyu, took the brunt of the attack. His massive body was riddled with holes, his gray Hari turning red. He stood tall, like a broken statue of a god, but his pillars had finally cracked. The Hashira were down. The square was silent, save for the crackle of burning buildings. Muzan stepped toward the unconscious slayers, his blade arms raised for the final execution. Just as Muzan's blade began its descent, a smell of charcoal and sun-drenched earth filled the air. Hinokami Kagura, Tanjiro, come out longed. His blade wasn't just on fire, it was glowing with a pure white heat. He performed the 1st form, then immediately transitioned into the 2nd, then the 3rd. He wasn't stopping. He was starting the endless loop. Muzan. Tanjiro's voice was a calm, lethal whisper. The sun is coming, and I am its messenger. Act 3. The 13th form. Scene 1. The furnace breathing the sound of ascension. The town square was no longer a battlefield. It was a vacuum of heat. As Tanjiro Kamado transitioned from the 12th form back into the 1st, his breathing changed. It wasn't the sound of a human inhaling. It was the roar of a blast furnace. Every breath pulled in air so fast, it created a whistling, metallic shriek. His lungs were glowing through his chest, the oxygen being incinerated at a molecular level to fuel the Hinokami Kagura. The heat radiating from his body was so intense that the blood on his face evaporated into red steam. With every step, the asphalt beneath his sandals didn't just crack, it liquefied. The silica on the road melted and cooled instantly into jagged shards of black glass. Tanjiro was moving through a world of fire and crystal, a sun god in the skin of a boy. Scene 2. The internal anarchy Muzan's mental breakdown. Inside Muzan's massive frame, the legendary coordination was shattering. Muzan's 5 brains were no longer a single unit. Brain 1 survival was screaming to divide and scatter. Brain 2 pride was demanding a counterattack. Brains 3 and 4 were paralyzed by cellular PSD, replaying the image of Yorichi's blade over and over. Brain 5 was struggling to keep the 7 hearts in rhythm, but Tanjiro's 13th form was a chaotic variable they couldn't calculate. As Tanjiro's blade carved a flaming arc, Brain 1 ordered a retreat, but Brain 2 forced the tentacles forward. This split-second delay was fatal. The tentacles clashed against each other, tangling in a mess of demon flesh. Muzan was literally fighting himself while Tanjiro was becoming one with the universe. Scene 3. The ghosts embrace Yoriki's final strike. Why? Why can't I regenerate? Muzan's 12 mouths screamed in a disharmonious chorus. The orange glow on his old scars was now a blinding white. The 13th form acted as a resonating frequency. It was waking up the dormant solar energy Yoriki had left in Muzan's cells 400 years ago. The scars were expanding, turning Muzan's flesh into a brittle, glowing ash. The 7 hearts began to seize. The solar heat wasn't just on the blade, it was in the air. Muzan was being cooked from the inside out by a ghost and a child. Every time Tanjiro completed a loop, another layer of Muzan's immortal flesh simply ceased to exist. Scene 4. The baby giant's desperation body horror. The sky was no longer black. It was a deep, bruised purple. The sun was seconds away. In a final, pathetic act of survival, Muzan's body underwent a catastrophic evolution. His organs retracted into a dense, marble-sized core, while his outer flesh expanded into a 3-story tall baby giant. This bloated mass of pale, translucent skin was designed to absorb the sun's rays for as long as possible while he burrowed into the earth. The giant's many hands clawed at the ground, shattering buildings and crushing everything in its path. I must live, the giant roared, a sound like grinding stones. Scene 5. The human wall. Now, everyone. Tanjiro's lungs were bleeding, but he didn't stop. The survivors, Zenitsu, Inosuke, Kanao, and the battered Hashira, threw themselves at the giant. Inosuke drove his jagged blades into the giant's feet, acting as a living brake. Zenitsu used his final godspeed to slash the giant's tendons. The Kikuchi pushed a derailed train car against the giant's path, their hands blistering from the heat. Gyu and Tsunemi, their arms broken, used their shoulders to push the mass back into the light. It was a war of centimeters. The giant's massive fists crushed a wagon, sending slayers flying, but 2 more took their place. They were no longer afraid of the Demon King. They were the shield of a new era. A single blinding beam of gold cut through the dust of the town square. It hit the giant's forehead. The flesh began to sizzle. A scream, louder than anything heard in 1,000 years, erupted from the giant. The sun that never sets was finally meeting its master. Tanjiro, pinned under the giant's massive hand, didn't look away. He watched as the gold light began to turn the Demon King into a pillar of salt and ash. "It's over, Muzan," Tanjiro whispered, his vision fading to white. "The morning is here." Act 4. The dawn of the new world. Scene 1. The ash of 1,000 years, the fall of a god. The sun was no longer a distant hope. It was a blinding, golden reality. As the first full rays hit the massive, bloated, baby giant form of Muzan, the sound wasn't a scream. It was a hiss of molecular dissolution. The sun's ultraviolet radiation acted like 1,000 invisible needles, shredding Muzan's Demon Dina. His skin didn't just burn, it turned into a translucent, glowing salt. Inside the giant mass, Muzan's core was shrieking. His internal monologue was a fractured mess, no. "This is impossible. I conquered the night. I built a kingdom of shadows. How can a boy with broken bones and a sun-scorched blade end a millennium of evolution?" He watched his own hands turn into gray flakes that drifted away in the morning breeze. The king of demons was being erased as if he had never existed. Scene 2. The king's final poison, the ultimate betrayal. But Muzan was a parasite until the very end. As his physical heart began to crumble, he looked at Tanjiro. Unconscious, pinned under his massive weight, his arm severed, his life fading. In a final, desperate surge of biological spite, Muzan concentrated every remaining drop of his blood and his entire millennial will into a single needle-like tentacle. He drove it deep into Tanjiro's neck. "You destroyed my body, Tanjiro Kamado," Muzan's fading voice whispered in Tanjiro's mind. "So, I will take yours. You will be the new king. You will walk in the sun. You will kill everyone you love. My dream lives in you." A black, oily substance surged through Tanjiro's veins, turning his blood into liquid shadow. Scene 3. The monster with kindness, the demon king, awakens. "Tanjiro! Wake up!" Gyu Tomioka screamed, crawling toward his student. But when Tanjiro's eyes snapped open, they weren't the warm, burgundy-eyes Gyu knew. They were slit-pupiled, blood-red, and glowing with a demonic hunger. Tanjiro's severed arm regrew in a second, but it was covered in jagged bone scales. Huge, red-veined wings erupted from his back. He let out a roar that shook the very foundation of the street. He lunged at Gyu, his claws inches away from the water Hashira's throat. "Don't do it, Tanjiro." Inosuke charged, his blades at Tanjiro's neck, but he was crying. He couldn't strike. Zenitsu was on the ground, sobbing, "Please, not you, anyone but you." The survivors were forced to fight the person who had just saved their lives. It was the cruelest joke of fate. Scene 4. The sisters embrace blood versus soul. Suddenly, a small, frantic figure burst through the wreckage. It was Nezuko. Now fully human, her eyes filled with tears of pure terror. She didn't draw a blade. She threw herself onto Tanjiro's back, her arms locking around his neck. "Oni-chan, stop, please," she screamed as Tanjiro's demon claws dug into her shoulders. Nezuko's blood, now containing the humanization medicine, began to seep into Tanjiro's wounds. It acted as a catalyst. Inside Tanjiro's mind, he was in a deep black ocean. Above him, he saw the hands of everyone he had ever lost: his mother, his siblings, and the fallen Hashira. Rengoku, Shinobu, Mukiro, Gyomei. They were all pushing him toward the light. With one final, soul-shattering cry, Tanjiro's demon scales began to flake away. The wings dissolved into ash. His eyes slowly turned back to their gentle, human color. He collapsed into Nezuko's arms, breathing for the first time as a boy who no longer had a war to fight. Scene 5. The final reunion, the legacy of the sun. The town square was silent. The survivors: Gyu, Tsunemi, Zenitsu, Inosuke, Kanao, stood amongst the ruins. The sun was fully up now, warm and golden. Gyu looked at his broken sword and then at the sky. For the first time in 1,000 years, there was no demon in the world, but the cost was written in the graves they would have to dig. As the wind blew, Tanjiro saw a vision of the Hashira standing in the distance, smiling at him before fading into the light of the morning. They were finally at peace. Scene 6. The blue spider lilies. Years later, in a peaceful valley, we see children playing. descendants who look like Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke. In the corner of the frame, tucked away in a hidden corner of the mountain, a patch of blue spider lilies finally blooms. They only bloom in the sun, under the care of those who have no malice in their hearts. The cycle of blood was over. The era of the sun had begun. Life is a flickering flame, but as long as we remember those who burn bright for us, the darkness will never win. This was the end. Not just of a battle, not just of a war, but of an entire era of darkness that had haunted the world for centuries. The sun rose that day, and for the first time, it didn't feel like something fragile or temporary. It felt eternal. The sacrifices, the pain, the endless nights of fear, all of it had finally led to this one quiet, beautiful moment of peace. Tanjiro and the others didn't just defeat a demon. They gave the world its future back, a future where families could live without fear, where children could grow up under the open sky, and where the word demon would one day fade into nothing more than a distant memory. And as the blue spider lilies bloomed under the endless sunlight, the story came to a gentle, complete close. Because the darkness was truly gone and the light had finally won forever. The end.